Before this video starts, if you enjoy this video, there are many more like it already on the channel, with many more like it to come in the future, so subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I would really appreciate it. I upload almost daily on this channel, so if you're looking for some consistent basketball talk, this is the place for it. Also, drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second, and it makes a massive difference. A few days ago, I made a video titled, "Is Paul George underrated or overrated?" And I said if that video did well, I would turn that into a series and cover other stars throughout the NBA and NBA history. And that video ended up being a 1 out of 10, mostly because 4,000 people liked it, which is a lot more than normal. So if you would like to see this series continue, feel free to drop a like on this one as well. Today we are going to be going over whether Steph Curry is underrated or overrated. Over the last 5 to 6 years, Steph Curry has been one of the biggest stars in basketball. His three-point shooting ability has been so damn good that he completely changed how teams play basketball. In the season before Steph Curry won his first MVP, the league average three-point attempts per team was 21.5. This season, it was 33.9. He won 2 MVPs, including a unanimous one in 2016, where he posted perhaps the greatest individual offensive season of all time, and he's been one of the biggest stars in the NBA over the past few years. But with that, as with any star in the NBA, he has been quite controversial. There's a lot of debates about how good he really is and was. Some people would go as far as to say that he is the best player in the league, some who would barely put him in their top 10. So is Steph Curry underrated or overrated? Let's find out. Before we get into the topic of this video though, I do have to quickly promote something which I have not done in a while, so let me live here. But if you're not interested at all in this, then I'll put a time card above to skip to the topic. If you have been a fan of my podcast called The Hoopscast, I have some unfortunate news for you. As you may have noticed, we haven't uploaded on that channel or put it out on anywhere in over a month, and that's because we basically decided to end that podcast. But I have some good news to fix that, I guess, and that is that we are relaunching with a different podcast that is going to be a personality rather than basketball podcast. It is called The Rusty and Mojo Show, and there is a new episode out right now. We were both tired of feeling limited to basketball discussion on the pod, so we're rebranding. We're also on camera now. We will be covering a variety of topics. This one is about the positives and negatives of being a YouTuber. I really want to see this pod succeed, so please go give it a watch. Here is a quick clip where we were asked what one of the most embarrassing moments of our lives was, and I answered with this. His first day of class, and I sit next to a pretty cute girl. Not a 10 out of 10, but like probably 7.5, 8. You know how they do the getting to know your classmates bullshit at the start of every class, at the start of every new semester and all that. One of the questions was, what do you want to do with your life? Like, what do you want to study? What do you want your career to be? And I always say video production because I don't want to go in depth about the fact that I have a YouTube channel because it's kind of cringe. So I said video production, and Jesus Christ, I said to this girl, I don't mean porn.
Why would you say that, you idiot?
Again, that link will be at the top of the description, but let's get on with the topic of this video. As I did with Paul George, I'm going to go over the career as well as playstyle of Steph Curry, and because I'm going to assume most of you know, I'm going to try and keep it fairly brief. Now, contrary to popular belief, Steph Curry actually existed before the 2014-15 season. He even played, in fact. It was just the lack of imagination from his head coach, as well as some lack of help/health that prevented him from really breaking out until the 2014-15 season. But Curry most definitely showed signs of becoming the player that he did. The opinion of Steph being the greatest shooter ever wasn't all that rare to see even before his first MVP season, and he gave the Clippers a series in 2014 as the 6th seed in a series where he averaged 23 and 9 and had a lot of big moments. Curry is obviously a great shooter. That really can go unsaid. He is the greatest shooter of all time, and if you feel differently, you are either blind or willfully ignorant. But his game goes far beyond that three-point shooting ability. The phrase that Stephen Curry is just a shooter is one of the dumbest ones that I see routinely mentioned by basketball fans. However, It is fair to say that his game is pretty connected to his shooting as a whole. And that's not a knock, I think that just goes to show how valuable shooting can be because it allows him to be so good in other areas. While Curry can do more than shoot, everything that he does as well as he does it that well because of the shooting. Say that 5 times fast. Steph is a pretty damn good ball handler. I definitely wouldn't say he's the second best in the league like many say in terms of his pure dribbling ability, but because he is such a damn good shooter, his B+ handles turn into A+. He gets guys on skates because of the threat of his jumper. It's a lot easier to break your defender down when he is glued to you 4 feet behind the line. He's also a pretty damn good passer, but his playmaking really becomes elite because of his shooting. There are dozens of players throughout history who are better passers than Curry, but very few are better playmakers. Steph, even without the ball, gets so much attention from opposing defenses that they end up leaving his teammates open. Even without him making the play, as in passing the ball, he's still making a play with how deadly he is as a shooter. This is a concept you've probably heard referred to as gravity. Curry is also a really good finisher, but again, that's connected to his shooting. He's a career 65% shooter at the rim, and that's because he often leaves his defender in the dust in fear of his jump shot. But on to his career thus far, it was the addition of Steve Kerr and his system, as well as the breakout seasons from both Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, that really allowed Steph to showcase just how good he could be. So he averaged 24 and 8 on nearly 50-40-90, leading the Warriors to 67 wins, and then in the following season he averaged 30 points a game, this time on 50-40-90, leading his team to 73 wins. Both times doing this as the lone superstar. The guy had a good supporting cast and a good system, but being able to lead your team to that much success as the only top 10 player on your team is not only something you don't see in this era, it's really not something you see in any era. But of course, that 73 win season ends up being bittersweet because they blew a 3-win lead in that year's finals. Now, I feel it often goes too unmentioned that Curry was injured in that series and Draymond Green was suspended when maybe he shouldn't have been, but at the end of the day, there really isn't any excuse to blow a 3-1 lead unless, like, everyone on the team dies. Even then, it's just like, dude, you only have to win one of the next 3 games, put the coach in there if you have to. So then in that offseason, the Warriors signed KD, and Curry gets to play with another superstar, and those two dominate the league over the next 2 seasons. In 2017, they only lose 1 game in the entirety of the playoffs, and in 2018, they struggle a bit with the Rockets, but once they get to the finals, it's just fine, as J.R. Smith forgets what the score is, and they probably would have won yet another title, but KD got hurt in the series versus the Rockets, and then after playing like 10 minutes, he was hurt versus the Raptors. I don't think that puts an asterisk next to the Raptors title because I really believe you can only give that out under severe circumstances, but I also think it's fair to say that if Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant are there for that entire series, they win that series. But you can also say that for the 2015 championship with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. But all I'm trying to say is there's a good chance things play out differently, and Curry now has 4 titles to his name. So that is Steph's career up until this point. He is going to be 32 years old heading into next season, and I think it's fair to say that he could probably play until 40 plus because his game relies on athleticism so little, and players who shoot the ball well tend to age pretty well. But now we get onto the verdict of whether or not Steph Curry is underrated or overrated, and as you can probably tell from the jersey that's hanging to my left, your right, you can probably guess what direction this is heading. With Steph, in terms of how underrated or overrated he is, I'd like to break this down into 2 categories. 1, just the baseline player of who Steph Curry is, and 2, the impact that he has had on basketball and whether either of those 2 categories are underrated or overrated. As a player, I think Steph is generally properly rated, though I think people have kind of forgotten just how good he really was over the last couple of seasons, but I think in general they're right. Now, as I said towards the start, there are people who go too far on either end of the spectrum. In general, I'd say Steph is commonly considered a top 5 player, and he's ranked no lower than 7 by anyone who's reasonable. There are those who would say he's the best player in the league, and I have certainly thought that at one point or another, and there are those who would say he's barely 10. I think the latter is far more reasonable than the former. So I guess you could say I think he's a little bit underrated in terms of where he is ranked as a player, and then I also think his impact in terms of how good he is on the court, not the game of basketball in general. We'll get to that in a second. I think that is pretty underrated as well. Curry is probably the most impactful offensive player in the history of basketball, and I do not say that lightly. I don't think any one player more impacts how good a offense is as a whole, as a team, than Steph Curry does. But getting on to his impact as a whole, when people talk about Steph Curry's legacy, his impact on the game of basketball is pretty much the first thing that comes up every time, and even then, I feel that can be underrated. I realize that a lot of people are not going to like what I am about to say because Steph is such a polarizing player in terms of how talented people think he is, but to me, Steph Curry has had more impact on the game of basketball as it is played than any player in NBA history. Now, before you freak out, please understand that I mean this in terms of how basketball is played and nothing more. Not impact as in how like Allen Iverson inspired players to express themselves more, not like how Kobe inspired a truly insane amount of basketball players that play today, not like the impact that the Dream Team had by making the NBA global. I mean impact in terms of how people play basketball. I mean impact in terms of the fact that since Curry came onto the scene, three-pointers around the league have gone up 50%. I mean how a player like Trae Young as a 6'1" scrawny, unathletic dude can be a top 5 pick in the draft because of his shooting ability. There is no one player that I think has individually had this much impact on the evolution of basketball. None that even really come close. There are natural evolutions of basketball that many players move forward, but individually, Curry has had the greatest impact. Yes, the game was heading into a more three-point shooting direction before Curry really took off, but Curry took that spark and turned it into an inferno. So in terms of impact on how basketball is played, Curry's impact often goes way understated because he has changed basketball more as an individual than anyone else ever. So in terms of impact, I think he is vastly underrated. In terms of how good of an actual player he is, I'd say he's mildly underrated just because I think some people have forgotten how good he is because he was injured in the previous season and he took a backseat to Kevin Durant over the past 3 years, but in general, he's pretty much properly rated. But yeah, that is if Steph Curry is underrated or overrated. That is the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music. Also, check out the new podcast, please. Please.